Why you're using two devices? Well, I was looking for a data warehousing solution to not only store my data, but also at the same time be able to apply some advanced analytics and transformation, specifically using Spark over my data. So I chose Azure Synapse. But at the same time, I'm using Azure Machine Learning to apply all my machine learning workload. So I need to do back and forth switching between these two to apply my Spark Analytics on Synapse and do my ML in Azure Machine Learning. Well, you don't need to. Bye, I like tea. That's okay. No, I mean you don't need to have this back and forth switching between these two services, because you can actually bring the power of Azure Synapse to Azure Machine Learning or submit your jobs from Azure ML to Synapse with a link service. Then let's check it out. Oh, wait, let me say this part this time. Let's go. Hello everyone, this is MG and welcome to another video, which we are going to showcase you this time how you can connect your Azure Synapse to Azure Machine Learning Workspace to not only be able to offload your code execution from Azure ML over a Spark pool in Azure Synapse, and also you can have interactive Synapse Spark code execution from your Azure Machine Learning Workspace. So let's check it out. Alright, so what you see in this screen right now, this is actually my Synapse workspace that I have created. And this is the interesting part. You not only can have SQL pools. If you're familiar with Azure Synapse, you know that you can have the SQL engine as a server to execute, let's say, your T-SQL codes, but at the same time, I can have a Spark pools. This is the interesting part that we're gonna talk a little bit more about it, because that's the power of Spark, which is in Synapse, but I want to use this power of Synapse with Spark in my Azure Machine Learning to also have Spark as an additional powerful tool in my Azure Machine Learning workspace to actually execute my codes. So you can see here I have already created a Spark pool before. You can create a new one here, and also even inside Synapse Studio or the UI, you can also create there. I'm going to show you. And I have a Spark pool. This is the amount of cores and RAM, number of the nodes, and I want to attach this to Azure ML and execute my code in Azure ML using this Spark pool. So coming back to my Azure Machine Learning workspace. If you don't know this Azure Machine Learning resource, what is this? What does it do? And you don't know about the capabilities, again, make sure you watch the first part of Azure MLOps video series that I provided a quick introduction about this service. So I'll add the link on the top right of the screen right here, so you can click on it and then watch out the video first. It will give you a good understanding about what is Azure Machine Learning, and then come back to this video. You will understand certainly better what we're doing here. So I'm not going to cover what is this tool, but we're gonna focus on how to use the power of Spark in Synapse in your Azure Machine Learning workspace. So what I'm gonna do, the first thing, you have to create a link service to connect your Synapse to Azure ML. This is exactly what we are doing here. As always, as you might know, we connect to this Azure ML workspace from the Python SDK of Azure ML and from the config file, and now I am connected to my Azure Machine Learning workspace. Whatever I want to do in Azure Machine Learning workspace, I need to refer to this object. So now I'm telling that, hey, I have a Synapse. This is the subscription ID. I had mine, I executed this code and I removed it for recording the video. You put yours there, the resource group and the name of your Azure Synapse. And this is the resource group that your Synapse located. So you can see this is the name of the Azure Synapse and the name of the resource group that I have added both here. And then you're telling that I want to create a link service inside this workspace that I am in right now. Give it a name. This is my Synapse link. That's the name of this link service. And here is the configurations that I have specified. Perfect. You can do this through the UI. I'm show you how, but also you can code as I just show you. Now, the second thing is, well, now I am connected to this Synapse through Azure ML, but also I want to connect to this Spark pool inside this Synapse to use it as a Spark engine in my Azure ML. So that's the second thing we need to do. Coming back to my Azure ML notebook, that's the second cell I have here, and I want to attach this Spark pool. I say that this is the Spark pool name, which is I have it actually here. A Spark pool is the name that I've chosen, but also that's called Spark pool in general. You could choose anything like SP or Spark, whatever you want to have, but use the same thing here so Azure ML knows what Spark pool you want to grab, and give it a name. Say that this is a Synapse Spark pool, that's the type. I want to attach this as a compute within this pool name, and you're good to go. Where you want to attach it, inside this workspace with the given name, and these are the configurations that I have specified on the top. After I executed these two, let's see what happened. First, we created the link service. So if I go to the link service, which is here, excellent. You see that I am connected to the Synapse. I gave the Synapse link. This is what I wrote in my code, and that's the Synapse workspace name, which is absolutely correct. So I got connected. You could do it here with adding a link service, or like me, you could do through the code. Then we attach the Spark pool of Synapse to Azure ML. So let's go to the compute part to see what are the attached computes. There you go. The Spark pool, which I had it here in Synapse, now is attached to my Azure Machine Learning, so I can refer to this whenever I want to use this to run my code over Spark. We are good to go. Then go back to the notebook. Are you done? No, one thing left. This link service that you created has an assigned identity. How you can get it? Just print this term. I execute it, I hided mine because you need to keep it, that's an ID. And then you have to give this ID or this link service a permission, and a Spark admin role permission to be able to execute my code in Synapse Spark. And also if MG or anyone want to use that Spark pool in Synapse, I should as a person also, or the user, should have the Spark admin role. So make sure these roles are specified. How? Just print this, copy this ID. This is the ID you want to give the Spark admin role. And how you do it? Well, let's do it together. You launch your Azure Synapse workspace, go to overview, open Studio. Let's wait a bit. Okay, asking me to log in. Do it. There you go. This is my Azure Synapse Studio, and let me show you how you can specify the role. So for doing so, you need to go to Manage. You can see access control. I added a new access control. This is what gonna be the role: Spark, Apache Spark admin. This is what I could select, and then select the user. That was the time I pasted the ID of that link service to give that a Spark admin role. I'm not going to do it again because I already did before recording the call, and this is what you will see. This is my link service called Synapse Link. This is exactly what we created here. Let me show you again quickly. In the link service, this is the Synapse Link we created. So I found it using the ID, and I gave this service principal Apache Spark administrator role. And I gave the same thing to myself as well as a user because I want to also interact with this Spark role. So two roles, Spark admin to the link service and myself. Done. Perfect. So now coming back to my notebooks, and we are done with the configuration. Now what's gonna be the first thing? Now I want to leverage the power of Synapse when I run an experiment on Azure ML. Let's say I have a code, I have a code.py, and I want to use PySpark and execute this as an experiment in Azure ML, but use that attached compute which has Synapse, which has a Spark that is coming from Synapse. How we can do it? Well, you need to import these materials, like HDFS stuff is needed to read the data for making it ready for the Synapse. You don't need to execute this part again. We already created the link service in the previous notebook, and also we created we attached the Synapse Spark pool to Azure ML. So we already did this. You don't need to do it again. And here there's a sample data set provided by Azure ML coming from the open data store. We can use basically any data, but as an example, I want to use this. So I have to upload it to the default data store, What is default data store? Again, if you have watched the introduction to Azure ML, I have explained that there, but very quickly saying that Azure ML is backed by a storage account, which is called default blob storage. And you can use it as a place to dump your data, register your data, upload it there, and then register it as a data set. So I'm uploading it to this default workspace blob store, given the path, which is here in my current directory. And then I can have it as a tabular data set or file data set as an input. As you know, any experiment you run in Azure ML, you have input and outputs. So the input here can be tabular data. This is how you basically refer a data set as a tabular data in Azure ML. As an example, it can be a file, and here as an HDFS, because we're going to use Spark, and Spark from Synapse, right? So just showing you both options here, and of course we need to define what's going to be the output of this experiment. The output going to be a file, HDFS, in the default blob storage, and when this code is completed, register the output as an Azure ML dataset and give it a name so I can use it later. I call it registered dataset. You can call it dataset A, B, C, whatever you want to have. And I'm opening, creating a new folder to put my codes there, and this is the code that I'm gonna execute. Data preparation.py. I wanna create this .py file using this magic command and put it in my code folder. So this is a code that I'm gonna write. It has some arguments and asking me, okay, what is the inputs of your code? It can be tabular input or a file input that I talked to you about. And here's the output directory. I grab this argument based on a user input, and then I grab that input data set referred here and register it as a Spark data frame. So here's the two differences. If you put your input for this experiment as a tabular input, not file, and let's say it's tabular input, then how you can read that file and convert it to be compatible with the Spark? If it's tabular, you need to get it using dataset object of Python sticky of Azure ML, and then with this nice command to Spark data frame, you are converting Azure ML dataset to a Spark, and then you're good to go with executing on a Spark. But if the input is file, then the way you have to read it is through just spark.read. That's very, if you have used a Spark, that's very familiar for you. Spark.read, that's a CSV, and that's the file input path coming from this argument, and you're good to go. So both of them do the same thing, but one for tabular data, one for file input. And then here, let's say I'm just using calls to partitionize in one in an appending mode and registered as a CSV or saved as a CSV, but it can be any code there. And then for executing this experiment, as you know, in Azure ML, you have to specify what packages, conda dependencies is needed for running this code. Let's say here's my dependencies, just I want to have Azure ML. It's a very simple code. I don't need any packages to be installed. And then for running that, I need run configurations. What am I gonna do in this run? I want to use a Spark, and here are the configurations, the driver, executors, number of the cores, memory, number of instances. And then I say, this is the script that I'm gonna run coming from this folder. Here are the inputs, and here is the configurations. Okay, Azure ML gonna know that I have to execute this using a Spark and attach compute. And I just submit an experiment, give it a name, done. I had my code getting executed using the Spark compute of Synapse. But let's say now you want to have it automated through a remote run. If you don't know what is Azure ML pipeline, please make sure you watch that video. I will add it on the top right side of this screen that talk about what is Azure ML pipeline, which means you can have your machine learning process, your transformation coding process defined in multiple steps and orchestrate those steps as an Azure ML pipeline. A step 1 run first, a step 2 run first, a step 3 runs first, or whatever. And each step can be executed on a different compute machine. A step 1 can be executed over Synapse Spark pool that we attached. The other step can be executed over a CPU cluster. So you have the flexibility of execute each part of your step in a different environment. So let's say now we want to create an Azure ML pipeline that there is a step inside run on Synapse Spark, and the other step run on a CPU cluster in Azure ML, which there's no Spark there by itself, right? So how we can do this is the section that I can explain. Let's say I want to have one of my steps in this Azure ML pipeline just run over a CPU cluster. No Spark or attached compute is needed. This is what I'm creating, my compute cluster here. This is the code that I'm gonna run without the need of Spark. I'm calling it train.py, but it can be anything. It's just a simple join, that's it. And then basically I'm telling that I have another step also, which is called data prep.py that we created on the top before. This one I want to run over Synapse Spark, but this one train.py over CPU cluster in Azure ML. So for this one, I need to specify what are the inputs. The input again can be tabular data, I talked to you, it can be file input. And what is the output? The output going to be the merge of these two, for example, as an HDFS. And then when I have the output from Synapse Spark, I want to use that output as an input for the second step, because that's coming from the first step. So I download it, I use it as a second step to run this CPU cluster based execution. So this is my first step running on Synapse. These are the execution arguments for Synapse Spark. And the second step, it's just a Python script that I'm running on Azure ML. No Spark or Synapse is needed. And here's my pipeline. Execute step 1 and then step 2. I execute it, give it a name, and done. What happened when I executed before recording this video, you can see that my dataset inputs are coming out. One of them was tabular, and the same thing I used but defined as a file. I use a Spark to do any merging, joining, whatever code you want to be running on Azure Synapse Spark, and then the output was being fed to CPU cluster of Azure ML to run another Python code. So you just saw the flexibility of using Apache Spark running over Synapse to be used as a compute engine for executing not all the steps, any single step of your Azure ML pipeline. Perfect. Before we finish, now the last thing. I want to use this Spark. I'm a data scientist, right? And I have my notebook here. As a data scientist, we love notebooks. Why? Because I can write down my code and run it right now, see the results. If it's error or something, change it, run this cell again. So you can have interactive experience. So the question is, can I have the interactive experience, write down my code, see the results, using the attached Spark of Synapse? The answer is yes, and that's the example of how we can do it. For doing so, you have to start with installing a package, Azure ML Synapse. Pip install, done. You're done. If you're using Jupyter Lab, run this. We don't need it. We are not using Jupyter Lab. And then just making sure now this Azure ML Synapse is installed using this magical command. I executed, no error. Perfect. Now I can have interactive Spark coding execution in Azure ML, but on backend, it's Synapse that is executing my code using Spark. So what I'm saying is, hey, this is the Spark pool we attached before. You know that how we attach this compute in the first notebook we did. Grab it and start a Synapse session for me. Now my code and notebook, whatever is going to be executed, it goes to Synapse and execute there. Perfect. Let's say now I'm using a Spark Synapse to read data, to read a file. You write the code here, but it will be executed in Synapse. So for reading a data, using Apache Spark in Synapse, currently, as of now, these three places are supported as a data store type to access the data. You can use the credentials to access, like here. When I say credential, you know each blob or ADLS has access key. You write it here, then you just read using a spark.read parquet or CSV. And you're using Apache Spark in Synapse to read this data, even if the code is in Azure ML. What is next? ADLS Gen 1, Gen 2, you can use credential and credential-less. You can use the user ID if MG has access to that data executed without the need of the key. You can put the service principal who has access to that file, or if you don't put anything, the identity will be used, which is the access control of MG. And the same thing is spark.read.csv. Now let's show it, see it in an actual example. Right now I'm using a spark.read and I'm using Synapse, so my Azure ML knows that this code wouldn't be executed in MG compute instance. It will be running on here, the Spark pool, which I have, not the SQL pool, sorry, Spark pool, inside this one in Azure Synapse. So I'm reading using a Spark from this blob. That's actually an open data set coming from provided by Azure. That's a demo, Titanic, the same file. And now I'm using PySpark. It is actually using a Spark. You can see it's not Python. It is the Python SDK of a Spark. I am filtering, doing group by, count, order by, and order by descending based on count. Show the first 10. There you go. I executed. It worked. Or you don't want to read directly using Apache Spark? You want to read the data first using Azure ML and then ship it to Apache Spark? Sure, you can. What you can do, I want to read the data using Azure ML SDK. So now we're using Azure ML Compute, okay? And then you say that convert this to Apache Spark. So now anything you want to do on TF, you can use PySpark. And also, you can use the Python SDK in Synapse as well. So you don't need to be here and execute this on Azure ML. You can execute this part even in Synapse as well. And that's it. So when you're connected using this magical command, you can write your code in a Spark, do whatever you want over this data, register the final outcome as a data set. So the rest of your code in Azure ML, if they don't need Synapse or Spark, they can be executed. And you were able to leverage the power of Spark in Apache Spark in Synapse using Azure ML with no need of back and forth and coding your transformation in Azure Synapse. I did everything in Azure ML, but I was able to leverage Azure Synapse. And let me check if I mentioned everything. I think, yeah, you're good. And that was all about this tutorial. All right, that was all about this video, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Did you like it? Oh yeah, but I like the tea more right now. Well, that's how I compensate for your coffees. Thank you.